So starting with affordability, regardless of whether you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent, we all can or should be able to agree that about one thing, reliable and affordable energy is a necessity for our nation and our national security. Energy is the foundation for our economy, impacting every business from the smallest bakeries and body shops to the largest corporations. Energy costs are embedded in every single product we buy. These costs compound throughout the economy and punish vulnerable communities and people with lower fixed incomes the most. The AARP represents perhaps the largest group of individuals on fixed incomes in our state, and that is senior citizens. They regularly intervene in our rate cases, and their core message is always the same. Higher energy bills are painful for their members. Yet even in North Dakota, an electricity exporting state where rates are among the lowest in the nation, costs for energy are rising, in some cases substantially. Natural gas customers in North Dakota have seen an increase of approximately 30% since 2016, a sure indication of the dual use of gas for home heating and electrical generation, and the lack of planning and coordination needed to sustain both of those important policies. Our electric rates are also rising. Transmission costs in North Dakota have increased 388% since 2003, and that trend will continue as the grid is expanded to accommodate renewable resources. They're just not located in the same places as the traditional baseload resources they're replacing. It's noteworthy that 35% of the energy consumed by North Dakotans last year came from renewable resources, one of the higher penetrations in the nation. Perhaps this explains why customers are growing leery of the promise of low-cost renewable energy. Our utilities have aggressively pursued green energy, assuring customers that it will save them money, yet their bills keep rising. So her first plea to senators in Washington, and my plea to you today is this: we need to be honest with citizens. Transitioning our grid to 100% renewable energy may be achievable someday, and for many it'll be desirable, but it is not going to lower costs for anyone, especially in the next couple decades. Next, we'll move to the reliability third of this. Speaking for Julie as chair of our commission, and she's also immediate past president and current resource adequacy liaison for MISO. And she's soon to be president of NARUC, something we're really proud of. That's our National Regulators Association, similar to CSG or NCSL for you all. She's intimately familiar with the challenges and opportunities facing the electric and gas industries during this massive technology transformation. I represent the PSC with SPP, as Chair Bell mentioned. So I think I share that same knowledge. As important as affordability is, reliability trumps it. And we really seen that a year and a half ago with Storm Uri, when suddenly reliability wasn't there. The reliability challenges in California, and Storm Uri in the south, and numerous Max Gen events MISO is experiencing are a good reality check on how the electric system works. These challenges are real and growing because the physics of the electric grid are stubborn and do not bend to the goals or deadlines that we impose upon them. Take, for example, the year 2016. MISO didn't have any grid events that required them to activate the use of their emergency procedures. From the beginning of MISO through 2016, no grid events. Since 2016, they've had 41 Max Gen events requiring the use of emergency procedures. According to their own reliability report, this is a key indicator of MISO's changing risk profile. While the emergency protocols are a legitimate way for MISO to access additional resources, relying on such protocols much more frequently and in non-traditional times are evidence of MISO's changing risk profile. The MISO reliability imperative document states, and that is attachment 3B. It's good reading if you want to go back and go through that. Rapid retirements of thermal units in a transmission system congested with 17 gigawatts of new renewable generation since 2011 have converged into a concerning trend in MISO, and that is illustrated in attachment 1 on page 4. Total installed generating capacity in MISO is increasing, but the accredited capacity is declining. And accredited capacity is the generation that can be counted on to meet demand when the demand is there. So please examine that charts and the other attachments carefully. These are not sustainable trends, and that is the bottom line. Our second plea to our national leaders and to everyone who is concerned about this transition is this: listen to those grid operators like SPP and like MISO. They are the independent third parties. Their goal is maintaining a stable, reliable grid throughout this energy transmission, and ignoring their advice will have serious consequences. Now let's move to timing. Let's consider for a moment that what we are trying to accomplish. Number of things here. We're seeking to close existing facilities prematurely and require customers to pay for them regardless of their operation. We're trying to permit and build renewable generating resources to replace many times over the capacity of the retired assets and the current electric system. We're trying to build and permit billions of dollars of new transmission line to connect these new resources to the grid. We're trying to figure out how to incorporate and operate the electric grid reliability with high penetrations of renewable resources which function very differently than the traditional resources around which the grid was built and has been operating for 100 years. We're trying to convert the entire transportation fleet to electric power and develop the charging stations and additional clean power supplies needed to keep them running. We're trying to convert 58 million home heating systems from gas to electricity and develop additional clean power supplies to keep them all warm. We're trying to convert all industrial power systems from gas to electricity and generate the additional clean power sources to keep them running. And all the while, we're running around promising to save consumers money. In short, there's a national movement to reinvent and rebuild the entire energy system that sustains the lives, work, travel, and communication of every single person and business in the United States. And this movement is being advanced by a long list of powerful interests, including the federal government, utilities, renewable developers, environmental groups, climate scientists, corporations, political parties, think tanks, and to a large degree, Wall Street and investors. Here in North Dakota, we're fighting a strong fight to protect reliability, and our energy and utility industries are making a difference. But make no mistake about it, the energy and electric markets are national and even international forces, and we cannot isolate ourselves from them. Considering the magnitude of this challenge and the warning signs we are already seeing from our current approach, the solution we suggest to you, but more importantly to everyone who will listen, is quite simple. Most of this can be solved with one thing, and that is patience. Chair Moeller, the head of operations for MISO, states it this way: mind the gap. And where are these gaps? There's a big gap in the megawatts being retired and the megawatts being added. 35%, which is about 20 gigawatts of MISO's coal fleet, will retire within the next 5 years. That is equal to in fact, that is more than all of North Dakota's coal fleet every single year for the next 5 years, just out of MISO. And by the way, most of North Dakota's coal fleet is in SPP. Many more than that will retire if you count those that could be impacted by new EPA regulations. Yet new generation in the MISO queue includes just 3.8 gigawatts of natural gas units to potentially replace this firm capacity on days when the wind isn't blowing. There's additional attachment on attachment 1, page 3 on that. The obvious way to bridge that gap is to extend the life of existing, already paid for resources that are operating and connected to the grid today. Potential new regulations from the EPA on regional haze, air toxins, etc., could exacerbate the capacity crisis facing our electric industry, and we need to fight those efforts with full force to enable the existing dispatchable resources we have to remain online. Another big gap exists between the reliability attributes of wind and solar megawatts versus thermal megawatts. Technology needs to fix that gap, and researchers need time to do that. Research and technology can also fix the emission problems of coal and natural gas through commercial scale carbon capture and storage, so these fuels can be retained in a diverse, low carbon mix for the future. A massive gap exists between the availability of critical minerals today and the amount needed to support wind, solar, and battery production. The International Energy Agency estimates that the critical mineral production will need to increase by 400% by 2040 to hit Paris Accord goals and 600% to be net zero by 2050. I will add that I just toured what was a couple years ago the largest battery facility in the United States. It's in San Diego. A new one has been built that is larger, but they started off as I think 100 or 150 megawatts of capacity for 1 hour. They did a big expansion that made that capacity available for 2.8 hours. And it works well in San Diego, you know, where they have a couple hours of a heat wave in the afternoon and then most of the rest of the day to recharge. And they were really emphasizing how well it's working. I inquired, well, why expand it some more? No plan for that in the near future because the batteries have to come from Asia and they just can't get them. So this is a serious gap. Another disturbing gap exists between the environmental standards, the pay, and the working conditions in countries where mining of critical minerals is occurring. That should be an important consideration in the environmental justice considerations of all policymakers. It is appalling what goes on in some of the countries that we are propping up with the battery industry in its current state. Quite simply, there's a huge gap, many gaps, I would say, between the President's 2035 clean energy deadline and the permitting processes, supply chains, and construction timelines necessary to build the new generation and transmission infrastructure needed to meet that goal. This includes a massive gap between generation capacity to meet current demand, which is tenuous, and the capacity needed to electrify our transportation fleet, home heating, and industrial processes. We all know that energy policy is a wedge issue. Activists, interest groups, and politicians love to use it to brand people, to divide policymakers into opposing camps, and to prohibit compromise. And we cannot let that continue. These are issues that must bring us together. Americans are counting on us to figure this out. North Dakota's common sense will be of growing consequence to our nation that is in need of our state's energy resources and our state's pragmatic policy choices. My hope is that you will reach out to your fellow legislators in other states, particularly those states in the MISO territory. That's her line. I want to emphasize the SPP states too. By the way, you know, many states like North Dakota that are in both because the lines follow utility lines, not state lines or county lines or even census mapping lines. But SPP territory is parts of North Dakota and Minnesota going straight down to parts of Texas and Louisiana. If you look at the map, that's 11, then add in New Mexico. That's the SPP footprint. But state policies need Policy makers need to better understand the situation we are in and the significant impact of their policy decisions, especially those that may drive early retirements of thermal resources. These will have real consequences on the reliability and affordability of the energy system that sustains our people and communities. I want to add here, yesterday and today is our quarterly meetings of SPP. Where Julie is on the OMS, which is I don't even know what it stands for off the top of my head. It's a state regulator from each of the MISO states. At SPP, we call it the RSC, the Regional State Committee. I'm president of that committee. We met all day yesterday. The board is meeting today, and I work with the board on their meeting, and I'm out for the moment to come talk to you. But yesterday, the Regional State Committee made a tough decision. We've worked on this for months, and we increased the planning reserve margin that our load-serving entities, that our SPP members are required to carry into the summer of 2023 from 12% to 15%. So what's the planning reserve margin? Imagine if you're a utility company in the SPP footprint and the maximum that you would ever expect to have to serve, and it's a summer high expectation. That's when the highest loads are needed. Whatever your max expectation is, let's say it was 100 megawatts. Part of your SPP membership is you have to have capacity to, at that time of year, be able to provide 112 megawatts. That extra 12%, that is that planning reserve margin. Like MISO, we have been on emergency alerts through most of the summer. There were almost none until the last few years. We had the big the curtailments a year and a half ago, but we are day after day in this hot weather on the cutting edge. We just required them to go to a 15% reserve margin. What's that going to? That's going to cost every one of these companies money because they have to go out and get additional generation now. And they're going to pass it on to the customers. But if we don't do that, we are going to run into those kinds of curtailments. And frankly, I could name all kinds of reasons why that's dreadful. But one of them, and I relate back to my time with you all in the legislature, in the last 25 years, how much have we worked to get people on home health care, out of institutions, in their homes, taking care of their home health care? And how many of them cannot survive day after day of 90 or 100 degree temperatures when their electricity's out? And they cannot survive extreme cold temperatures, and many of them need machines that run on electricity. Our electricity is more important than ever, and that's why we made that difficult choice yesterday. The bottom line is that together we can forge a thoughtful, prudent path through this energy transition that keeps the power on at all times at prices people can afford. I thank you, Chair Bell. That concludes my comments, and I'll stand for questions.